Entering the final game of the 2012 regular season, Adrian Peterson had already rushed for 1,898 yards, which was 8th most ever in a single season. He was 207 yards away from the all-time record. His team also needed a win to make the playoffs. The Vikings led early, but in the third quarter the Packers came back to trail by only 3. That's when the Vikings handed it off to Peterson, who evaded the 337-pound B.J. Raji, then bounced off the 340-pound Ryan Pickett to gain 20 yards. With that one run, he surpassed O.J. Simpson, Chris Johnson, and Terrell Davis to have the 4th most rushing yards ever in a season. But would he have enough gas to hit the record in that final game? Would the Vikings be able to make the playoffs? To understand Adrian Peterson, you need to first know where he came from. He was born in Palestine, Texas, to parents Benita Brown and Nelson Peterson, both accomplished college athletes. Benita was a sprinter and long jumper, and Nelson played basketball at Idaho State. Nelson even looked to have a shot at the pros until an accident struck. His brother was cleaning a gun and it discharged, shooting him in the leg, ending Nelson's hoop dreams. Nelson would be the one to give his son Adrian his famous nickname of All Day. He said of his son, he could go all day, referring to Adrian's constant high level of energy as a child. But Adrian's parents were strict, and when he misbehaved, they often disciplined him with switches. Adrian does credit this harsh discipline for keeping him on the right path, but he'd need more than just that. Growing up, Adrian's best friend was his older brother Brian. When Adrian was only 7 and Brian was 9, Adrian witnessed Brian get struck and killed by a drunk driver while riding his bicycle. When Adrian was 13, his father went to jail for 10 years for money laundering in connection with a crack cocaine ring. There were so many incidents in Peterson's life that could have diminished him, but he devoted himself to sports, and that made all the difference. He did track and field like his mother, he played basketball like his father, and he also excelled at football. So much so that he received a lot of attention from college scouts. Adrian Peterson was a 5-star recruit and had plenty of options to choose from. He was considering schools like Texas, Texas A&M, USC, Miami, Oklahoma, and several others. He wanted to go somewhere where he could be a difference maker and be able to compete for a national championship, so he eventually chose the University of Oklahoma. In just his freshman year, he finished 2nd in Heisman voting. In 13 games, he had 1,925 rushing yards and 15 touchdowns. He rushed for more than 100 yards in each of his first 9 games that season. That was an NCAA freshman record. His sophomore year, he played in 11 games, had 1,104 rushing yards and 14 touchdowns. His junior year, he only played in 7 games. He still had 1,012 rushing yards and 12 rushing touchdowns. This averaged to be about 144 yards per game and 1.7 touchdowns per game. His physical style of play got him well known in the college scene. Peterson had been focused on football since an early age, and now he was becoming an unrelenting force on the field. However, his aggressive running style also earned him several injuries, causing him to miss some of those games. It was a concern that some NFL GMs raised, but most teams loved the upside that this young man had. Peterson declared for the 2007 NFL Draft, foregoing his senior year. The 6'1", 220-pound prospect had a rare blend of speed, power, and quickness. When he ran the ball, it seemed like he wanted to get to the spot more than anyone wanted to stop him from getting there. And for those reasons, he was picked 7th overall by the Minnesota Vikings. He was the first running back to go off the board in the 2007 draft, and just like he did in college, he made an immediate impact in his rookie year for the Vikings offense. His very first regular season game was against the Falcons, and he rushed 19 times for 103 yards. And did we mention this guy could catch it out of the backfield? His first NFL touchdown came off a pass that Devarius Jackson led Peterson a little too much, but Peterson showed excellent focus, corralled the ball, and took it 60 yards to the house. He made a big impact on their 24-3 win. In Peterson's 3rd game of his career, he had another 100-yard rushing performance and his first rushing touchdown. He showed his agility in space, faking out a defender and then turning the Jets on to make it into the end zone. 2 games later, the Vikings battled the Bears in Chicago. It was back and forth all game, and Peterson was keeping the Vikings in it. On only 20 carries, he had 224 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns, one of which he showed his entire arsenal. It was nothing compared to what he did a few weeks later against the Chargers. It felt like no one could tackle him. He had 3 rushing touchdowns, and he kept racking up yards. 43 in the first half, 107 in the third quarter. In the fourth quarter, he kept ripping off big runs with devastating cuts, leaving defenders frozen in their spots. With another long touchdown run, he hit 251 yards, tied for sixth most in a single game. The Vikings offense kept giving it to him, and late in the fourth quarter, he broke up another huge run that only came to an end when a defender illegally brought him down. With that run, he reached 293 rushing yards, passing everyone on the single-game rushing yardage list, except for one. Jamal Lewis once had 295 yards in a game. So with one last handoff, Peterson accumulated 3 more yards, not only helping his team secure a victory, but breaking the record for the most rushing yards in a single game with 296. Peterson finished his rookie season with 1,341 rushing yards and 12 rushing touchdowns. He led the league in yards per game and won Offensive Rookie of the Year. And he wasn't done yet. Peterson kept dominating, leading the league in yards per game and total rushing yards the very next season with 1,760. His third year, he led the league in rushing touchdowns with 18, including an iconic one against the Browns. Peterson flew past the first level of defenders, escaped an arm tackle, juked a defender, escaped another tackle, shoved a defender out of bounds, turned back to deliver a stiff arm, and then capped off his 64-yard run by putting 6 points on the board. In 2011, Peterson's fifth season, he suffered a horrible injury on Christmas Eve, tearing both his ACL and MCL. It was a devastating blow, and the timing made it even worse. The Vikings even told Peterson to sit the next season out entirely to save himself for the following one. But Peterson, being the strong-willed individual that he is, told the team he'd be back for Week 1 of the 2012 season. Many believed it to be unwise and doubted a quick comeback from such a serious injury. Not only did Peterson return when he said he was going to, but he actually was about to have arguably the best season ever by a running back. He had 84 yards and 2 touchdowns in his first game back in Week 1. In Week 4, he got back to rushing over 100 yards in a game. From Week 7 to Week 15, Peterson didn't rush for less than 100 yards in any single game, including performances of 210 yards and 212 yards on December 2nd and December 16th, respectively. The Vikings were also racking up wins. In the last week of the season, they'd be playing the Packers. They needed a win to get into the playoffs. And at this point, Peterson was 8th all-time in total rushing yards in a regular season, with one important game left to play. Peterson was on a mission. Early in the game, he tore through Green Bay for a 22-yard run, passing Earl Campbell to be 7th all-time for rushing yards in a season. Minnesota led 20-10 by halftime, and early in the third quarter, the Packers cut that lead to make it 20-17. So the Vikings looked to their man in the backfield, who they still called all day, as the name seemed to fit even after that severe injury last season. Peterson bruised defenders and cruised for another 20 yards. Now he surpassed 2,000 total rushing yards, leapfrogging O.J. Simpson, Chris Johnson, and Terrell Davis. He was 4th all-time. In the fourth quarter, it was a tie game, 27-27. The Vikings kept calling Peterson's number. His power was so devastating that it took multiple Packers to bring him down. But not before a 12-yard run pushed him past Barry Sanders to be 3rd all-time. With less than 2 minutes left, the game was tied at 34-34. The Vikings handed the ball to Peterson, who ran left, but there was nowhere to go. So he bounced it to the right for 7 hard-fought yards. 2,068 total yards. He passed Jamal Lewis with that run. The only man ahead of him was Eric Dickerson with 2,105. A few more carries for Peterson, 7 more yards, and there were 24 seconds left in a tie game. The Vikings needed to be in a secure field goal range for their kicker. And then Peterson busted out another huge run, going for 25 yards and putting the Vikings in position to kick the game-winning field goal and clinch a playoff berth. Peterson's last carry put him at 2,097 rushing yards on the season, just 8 yards shy of the record. But the Vikings needed every one of Peterson's yards to get into the playoffs. After 10 years in Minnesota, Peterson floated around to a few other teams. The last time Peterson stepped on a field was 2021. In his 15-year career, he amassed 14,918 rushing yards, 5th all-time. He had 120 rushing touchdowns, 4th all-time. Most of those came from his peak years in Minnesota when he was basically unstoppable. And it wasn't just the yards and touchdowns, it was the way Peterson got them. He made professional NFL defenses look paper thin the way he tore through them. He ran like an old-school bruiser with modern-day speed. He broke the rushing yards per game record his rookie year and won Rookie of the Year. He was second all-time in rushing yards in a season in 2012 and won the MVP that year. Let's not forget that this was the year right after his terrible injury. The best way to describe Adrian Peterson? Relentless. He even exemplifies that now. He hasn't played since 2021, but he technically still hasn't retired. He's currently a free agent. In a league that doesn't value running backs, especially older ones, Peterson still believes he can play at age 39. He's undoubtedly one of the best running backs in NFL history, and it's clear he loves the game of football. It doesn't look like he will be leaving it anytime soon.